They were seen to be pivotal, vital, fundamental members of the royal family.
Despite the Queen's efforts to find a way to keep them within the royal family and, make best use of their talents, they had made clear that they wanted to leave.
And I admire the Queen for her discretion and her ability to know and understand that sometimes speaking should be done only when necessary in certain instances.
That's inconsistent with who Meghan is as a person. She's obviously a very well-researched person.
And even the Queen, whose opinion is so valued by the entire country, was disregarded. But of course, I think she was advising him exactly the right thing.
My goodness, after this series, there's a lot more that he should apologise for.
Meghan and Harry have had every opportunity publicly to state their case, and they have been gutless because they know it is impossible.
It's Meghan Markle. This chick just must be unbearable to be around.
It's really so sad, isn't it, that both Meghan and Harry seem so estranged from their families.
What should the Queen do? What is the right thing for the Queen to do? And then she would do it. She gave that couple the entire Commonwealth to explore, and that seemed to be brilliant.
It seems to me that they have a problem, those two, because they've told their story. I don't know how they can go on and on telling their story, and eventually...
She's nuts, he's nuts for getting himself into this, and there was not a lot of love for Meghan.
But I think you've got to pick your moments to do it, in which to do that. And he's not. He just wants to fire off.
My prediction is this ain't gonna last if it hasn't broken up already.
There's a version of this story where everything was fine, where Meghan Markle entered the royal family, charmed Queen Elizabeth, and the relationship stayed warm right up until the end. That is the version Harry and Meghan have told repeatedly. In interviews, in their Netflix series, in Spare, the Queen was wonderful. She was always kind. They had a bond, but there is another version. And in recent months, that version has been getting harder to ignore. If you want more deep dives like this, make sure to subscribe to Royal Archives. Because what is now surfacing from royal authors, palace insiders, and journalists who have spent years covering the House of Windsor tells a different story entirely. Not a story of warmth maintained, a story of warmth withdrawn. And according to those close to the late monarch, there was a specific turning point, a moment or a series of them, and that quietly changed everything. Charlotte Griffiths, editor-at-large at the Mail on Sunday, and one of the most connected voices in royal commentary, has been among those calling out what she describes as a pattern that the palace chose to stay silent about for years. A pattern that, in her view, the public still hasn't fully been told. And when you lay out the timeline, it is not difficult to see why. Queen Elizabeth II was not a woman who made enemies easily. 70 years on the throne, 14 prime ministers, crises that would have broken lesser institutions. She endured all of it with the kind of discipline that made personal grievance look almost impossible. Those around her knew better. She had opinions. She was just extraordinarily careful about who heard them. That is what makes what has now been reported so striking. When Harry first introduced Meghan, the reception was, by most accounts, genuinely warm. Royal author Robert Hardman, whose recent book Elizabeth II draws on sources from the Queen's inner circle, writes that Elizabeth was actively delighted by Harry's future wife. She went out of her way.
She'd really made a very great effort to make a success of their royal life.
She bent certain royal conventions to allow Meghan to join family engagements early before the wedding. She gave her meaningful patronages, including the National Theatre, a deliberate nod to Meghan's background as an actress. These were not small gestures. From the Queen, they were signals of real investment. And then, according to those same sources, Meghan walked away from them. The patronages, carefully chosen, personally significant, were, in the words of one palace insider cited by Hardman, initially embraced and then just torn up. That shift, the source said, went from baffling to frustrating to something else entirely, something that took longer to name. That's where things stopped making sense. Because if the Queen had simply been distant from the start, if there had been an obvious clash from day one, the story would be straightforward. What makes this account so difficult to dismiss is the gap between how it began and how it ended. The same woman who had bent her own rules to welcome Meghan in was, by the end, being described by those closest to her in terms that no one inside the palace had expected to hear. Hardman's sources put it plainly. After years of watching events unfold, the exit from royal duties, the move to California, the Netflix deal, the Oprah interview, those around the Queen became convinced she believed Meghan had been showing what one insider called narcissistic tendencies.
Those around her were certain that she saw narcissistic tendencies.
These were not fringe voices. These were people in the room, people who had spent years reading the Queen's silences as carefully as her words. One senior aide, reflecting on the 2021 Oprah interview, reportedly said something that stopped others in their tracks. Having Oprah at the wedding, the aide said, now made sense. The implication being that what played out publicly in March 2021 had not been spontaneous. That the move to California, the carefully timed revelations, the access granted to a specific American talk show host had, in hindsight, looked like a plan. Whether that assessment is fair is something reasonable people can disagree on, but it is worth asking. Why would people this close to the Queen, people whose entire professional lives were built on discretion, say something like that at all? Charlotte Griffiths has pointed to what she sees as a fundamental misread on Meghan's part. The Queen's silence was never the same as approval. The institution had a long history of absorbing difficult moments quietly, of waiting, watching, and drawing conclusions that were never announced publicly. Those who understood how the palace worked knew that the absence of public criticism was not the same as private support. And the Oprah interview, by most insider accounts, was the moment that changed the temperature permanently. In March 2021, Harry and Meghan sat down with Oprah Winfrey and made a series of allegations that landed like a grenade inside Buckingham Palace. Claims about race, claims about mental health support being withheld.
They didn't want him to be a prince or a princess, not knowing what the gender would be.
The implication that the institution had failed them in ways that could not be quietly resolved.
There's a lot to work through there. I feel really let down.
The Queen responded publicly in a statement, measured, careful, precise. She said the issues raised were concerning and would be addressed privately. But behind closed doors, the reaction was described very differently. One former courtier, speaking to royal journalists, put it in terms that could not be walked back. The Queen, this person said, felt betrayed by Harry. And when he and Meghan attacked the institution she had spent her entire life serving, that betrayal, in the courtier's words, was complete. Complete. Not ongoing, not recoverable, complete. That is a word that carries weight coming from someone inside the household of a woman known for her capacity to forgive. And there is one more account that has circulated, reported in The Spectator in 2023 and referenced since by multiple royal observers. At a drinks reception at Balmoral Castle in August 2022, just weeks before the Queen's death, a source present at the gathering claimed the monarch made a remark about Meghan that shocked those who heard it. According to this account, the Queen described Harry's marriage as a complete catastrophe and used a single word to describe Meghan herself that, by all accounts, left everyone present momentarily silent. It was, the source said, out of character. Not the kind of language she used, but it came from a woman who knew her time was short. A woman who, by that point, had watched years of careful investment be rejected, watched the institution she had devoted everything to be publicly attacked, and watched her grandson, whom she clearly loved, disappear into a life and a narrative she did not recognize. Something about that account doesn't add up with the image Meghan has carefully constructed of their relationship. And Griffiths, among others, has been direct about why the gap between the public version and the private reality matters. It is not about relitigating old grievances. It is about understanding what actually happened. Because the version that Harry and Meghan have presented publicly still doesn't align with what sources inside the palace have consistently described. Across multiple books, multiple journalists, and multiple accounts from people who were there. Hardman himself was careful to note that the Queen was famously skilled at concealing her true feelings.
On the one hand, it's sort of not saying anything, and on the other hand, it's saying everything. It's doing it very elegantly and very forcefully.
That is precisely what makes the accounts from her inner circle so significant. These were people who knew how to read her, people who understood that what she didn't say publicly was rarely what she felt privately. The picture that emerges when you line up all of these accounts together is of a relationship that started with genuine warmth and ended somewhere else entirely, not with a dramatic rupture, not with a public confrontation, but with a quiet, complete withdrawal of something that had taken years to build and by all accounts was never rebuilt. Charlotte Griffiths has been consistent on this point. What changed how the Queen saw Meghan was not one single incident. It was a series of choices, public and private, that people close to the monarch watched accumulate over time. The patronages abandoned, the exit announced without warning to the palace, the interview that aired with Prince Philip still in the hospital, the daughter named after a nickname the Queen had never publicly confirmed she approved. Each one on its own could perhaps have been absorbed. Together, they told a story, and the question that keeps surfacing, the one that Charlotte Griffiths and others have continued to press, is whether the version Meghan has always told about her relationship with the Queen was ever the full truth, or whether what the palace insiders have described piece by piece over the past 2 years is closer to what actually happened in those private rooms at Windsor and Balmoral. That question has never been definitively answered, but the accounts keep coming, the sources keep speaking, and the picture they paint looks less and less like the fairy tale, and more like something the palace chose very deliberately, never to say out loud while the Queen was alive. So what changed how Queen Elizabeth saw Meghan Markle? According to those who were there, it wasn't one thing, it was everything. Over time, adding up to a conclusion that the most disciplined woman in modern royal history apparently reached quietly, privately, and without announcement. And that, in many ways, is the most royal ending to this story there could possibly be. If this raised questions you haven't seen asked anywhere else, subscribe to Royal Archives. There is more of this coming, because the full picture of what happened inside that family during those final years is still being uncovered, and not all of it has been reported yet,